India's energy consumption is set to grow 4.2% a year by 2035, faster than that of all major economies in the world, according to BP Energy Outlook. The energy needs will peak at approximately 255,000 megawatts and 295,000 megawatts at 9% growth. India's current dependence on fossil fuels, particularly coal, is of concern for the country's climate change agreements. In addition, there are security concerns regarding the supply chain for energy from the West Asian states. Internally as well, there are several risks to the oil and gas sector in India.
Oil industry is being targeted in terms of pilferage by internal stakeholders. There are also external threats which always happen to this energy sector in such cases. I personally feel this should be categorized into three areas. One is during its exploration stage, when industry goes and tries to explore oil. Second is when the production is on, and third is during supply chain.
India Risk Report will look into how India can ensure that its energy future remains secure and economic needs are not affected.
Hello and welcome to another episode of India Risk Report. India's energy requirements are continuing to grow, and they will grow at something like 4.2% every year till 2055. And India, because of that, will remain a net importer largely of its energy requirements, most of it coming to us from West Asia, where there is currently a lot of turmoil, and therefore the geopolitics of the regions around India from where India gets its energy requirements is also going to be a focus of our discussion today. We have two very highly regarded experts with us on the subject of energy security. I have with us Mr. Talmiz Ahmed, who has been India's envoy to various countries in the West Asian region and has written and continues to write extensively and lecture extensively on energy security and West Asian geopolitics. And we have the one and only Mr. Narendra Taneja, who is highly regarded as an energy security expert, has great links with the international community, particularly in the field of energy security, and is, of course, his advice is sought after by everybody, including the government of India. Mr. Taneja, sir, my first question to you is that India's energy requirements will continue to grow, but the areas in which where we have a great dependence on, they are established areas such as coal energy, which is going to come, as well as hydrocarbons and oil, etc. But a perpetual problem area, it seems, that we are not exploring enough in the country to somehow tide over the requirement which are only increasing for India's consumption because we are a growing economy. Where is there this disconnect between a growing requirement and the need to somehow become a little more self-sufficient?
Well, two important points here. Number one, on the one hand, we are handling the energy transition from mainly or primarily fossil fuels economy to fossil fuel plus atomic plus renewables economy. So this transition is a huge challenge for us, both in terms of policy formulation, and also basically explaining it to the ordinary consumer. And in my own view, this transition is, in India's case, is probably going to take 60 to 70 years. So yeah, and it's a huge challenge. How do you manage that? The economics of it, politics of it, and also the diplomacy of the whole thing. Second aspect which you talked about is this, since our economy is heavily dependent on hydrocarbons, particularly fossil fuel, and because our dependence on coal is very high. But we have decided that except for the coal-fired power plants which are under construction, we are not going to build any further coal-based power plants, which means that we move more in the direction of gas, and gas is going to be the kind of mainstay when it comes to India's energy mix. Now, but gas, again, our dependence on imported gas is already very high, close to 50%. And at the same time, when it comes to oil, our dependence on oil will also continue for decades to come. And there our dependence is 82%, which is likely to rise to 90% in time to come. Today, we are consuming roughly about 4 million barrels a day. By 2040, this is going to touch actually 10 million barrels a day. Almost the entire production from Saudi Arabia we can consume. Just to give you one example, daily production from Saudi Arabia. So with economy growing fast, energy aspirations growing fast, and we being a democracy. Now the challenge is, how do you mobilize so much of energy? As far as our own basins, our own areas concerned, offshore, onshore, is limited. We are not as blessed with a number of other countries. We have no alternative but to import more oil, import more gas, and even import more uranium for our nuclear ambitions.
Right. I mean, very comprehensively put across, but I think there are one or two issues that you brought out, and I want Mr. Ahmed to give us his considered wisdom on that. One is the fact of this import dependence. I've read somewhere that the Prime Minister has articulated a view that by 2022, we would like to dramatically reduce our import dependence, something to a tune of about 10% of what it is currently. So there is that one aspect. The second aspect is, sir, again, you are familiar with the kind of turmoil in West Asia. So therefore, what could be regarded as the barest minimum level of consistency that we can hope for in terms of being supplied our energy requirements with or without a war brewing out there? And the third linked factor is that the sectarian divide in West Asia and the geopolitics of that conflict apart. For example, America putting restrictions on Iran, on how much it can give out or export. At the same time, Qatar is again a big supplier of energy to us and again has come under some kind of pressure from the Sunni lobbies of GCC. So therefore, there is all sorts of geopolitics playing out there, and our dependence, and if things go out of hand, how do we measure up to that, and how do we take countermeasures to fulfill our energy requirements?
We have with us a government document, that is the draft new energy policy document. It has been prepared by the Niti Aayog. It is available in the public domain. It is being presently debated within the various departments of energy in our country. That has given very considered projections with regard to India's energy requirements. And the scenario that unfolds in this document is that we are going to be very heavily import dependent in terms of our escalating requirements for every for every aspect of energy, whether it is coal or oil or gas or any other form of energy. We are going to be very heavily import dependent. And we also will be increasing our requirements consistently throughout this period up to 2040, which is the period of the report. We will also remain very strongly dependent on West Asia. There is no doubt about it. West Asia alone has the potential to meet our escalating needs. The potential is about 40% in terms of reserves, compared to only about 14% in the United States and even less in Russia. So West Asia has the potential. We also have a historic connectivity with West Asia. You are absolutely right to convey a sense of concern with regard to the political situation there, and I share it with you very strongly. I did not have the same concerns earlier. Earlier as well, we used to have conflicts. We had the Afghan jihad in the 1980s and the Iran-Iraq war, and we had the Iran occupation of Kuwait. But today you have an even more serious problem, and that is the direct confrontation between Saudi Arabia and Iran. If this were to escalate into conflict, we would have very serious difficulties with regard to energy security.
Right. Mr. Taneja, sir, there is another linked aspect, and this is something that you are again very familiar with, and that is that foreign oil companies which had hoped to do business with India have shown less and less satisfactory interest in India's hydrocarbon potential. At the same time, hydrocarbon is an area you just talked about, which is an area we obviously are hugely dependent on. So, and the linked aspect of India's own energy requirement is, say, for instance, there's a lot of talk about solar energy. But solar energy has its limitations. It has been shown that peak consumption of electricity is normally between 6 and 8 in the evening. And that is the time when perhaps solar energy cannot fulfill your requirements to the extent that it can in earlier parts of the day. So how do we sort of match this requirement between alternate sources of energy and, as as an alternate to the dependence on importing of straightforward energy like hydrocarbon and oil and gas?
Yeah, that's precisely what I was talking about when I was talking about energy transition. We need to recast. In the sense, we have no alternative. We need to push and give, incentivize renewables, because we are very blessed in terms of sun. The solar radiation may not be as high as in Saudi Arabia or in Algeria, but still we are reasonably well blessed in terms of solar potential. But the question is that, for next 30 years, 40 years, we have no alternative but to actually depend on hydrocarbons. We have to transform our economy from $2.3 billion to $15 trillion. For that we need more oil, we need more coal, and we need more natural gas. But the only thing is that as part of the very meditated strategy, we are also diversifying the supply. Like we have started importing from the US, which I think is a good step. We should be importing more from Brazil and Venezuela. We already do, but from other countries. We should basically look for other geographies in order to bring oil. And let's not forget one thing. In the meantime, when you look at the 20 years or 25 year scenario, what has happened from a $2.3 trillion economy, we will become roughly $14 trillion economy, which means that if the oil prices go up, the gas prices will be able to absorb it. Our economy by that time will be so large. So, and as far as Middle Eastern, West Asian countries are concerned, we don't need to worry too much, because by that time our Navy, our armed forces, our economy, we will basically be in a different league altogether. And we will be in a position actually to use all that, military power and money power and our economic muscles and all that, in order to make sure that the supply to India, that's not really a point of worry. The important point here is to build our, strength, economic strength, our R&D, strengthen our oil and gas companies, and strengthen our armed forces.
Well, on that positive note, we need to go in for a break, and quite clearly, there is hope at the end of the tunnel as we see it, has been articulated by our experts. But we look at issues after a break. What else can India do internally to ensure that India's energy security continues to be an issue that we are addressing in a very, very serious manner? But that after a break. Welcome back. We are continuing to look at India's energy security requirements and the challenges for India in the years ahead, and we have our two experts with us. Mr. Ahmed sir, it is said that the energy sector is largely diplomacy driven. You having been a diplomat, and you've earlier articulated the challenges that we face internationally. In fact, Mr. Taneja is also very well conversant with that. What would you say if you were to outline in bullet points to say that the priority areas for our diplomacy to ensure that our energy requirements remain uninterrupted regardless of the levels of turmoil that we are seeing in our regions?
Obviously, West Asia has to be and has to remain the most important aspect in terms of our energy diplomacy. This region provides the bulk of our petroleum requirements as also our gas requirements. They are major economic partners as also partners in terms of investments and joint ventures. 8 million people, 8 million Indians live in this region and send back to India $35 billion every year. This has to be our principal focus in terms of our diplomacy. The Prime Minister has shown the way. He has visited the 4 major countries of the region, Saudi Arabia, Iran, UAE and Qatar. We have joint statements that have been concluded that speak of a strategic partnership that envisages a diplomatic engagement, a security engagement and an economic and energy engagement. All the documentation is there. We now have to move forward in giving substance to what we has been agreed to. We need to have much more robust an engagement with regard to the energy side so that our security policy, energy security policy can become substantial.
May I just interrupt, sir, that of course West Asia is a very important area, but as I understand that despite our own limitations and shortages of energy at home, we are still an energy supplier to some of our neighboring countries like Nepal. So that is also part of our energy diplomacy. Is that correct, sir?
I should clarify that what we supply are petroleum products.
Right.
Because we have a large number of refineries and India has emerged as a major provider of petroleum products, primarily from the private sector.
Right.
We also export electricity. We are electricity traders.
Right.
We export electricity, we buy electricity from Nepal and Bhutan, and we sell electricity to Bangladesh. So electricity trade is a new area which we can take forward in times to come. But what you and I are discussing today is energy security, which is in terms of our long-term interest. Right. In order to sustain our growth rates, get rid of energy poverty, and move forward in terms of our corporate interest, so that we can actually realize the growth that the government needs in order to move forward. That is where that is where the scenario in West Asia becomes important. I would also like to mention Central Asia. Right. At the moment, it has been marginal to us because we had no direct connectivity. But now with the opening of Chabahar and the road and railway connectivities, we could have a scenario of pipelines. We had envisaged some 10 years ago an Asian gas grid so that we could get Central Asian gas to our region. We could also address some of the issues relating to transnational pipelines that have been put on the back burner due to political issues. We can also look at the possibility of importing electricity from Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, which we have not been able to do up to now because of the scenario in Afghanistan. So the potential is there in terms of cooperation, but because of the existing political situation, we have not been able to move forward. In regard to West Asia, that importance of that region will remain.
Taneja sir, of course, we keep focusing a lot on West Asia, but my understanding is also, I don't know, you may like to clear my mind on two issues. One is alternate sources of energy other than oil and gas from West Asia. I thought Indonesia could be a partner, and so could perhaps Australia, in terms of providing us coal and probably shale gas related energy, because there is a bit of a surplus in those countries, or you may correct me if I'm wrong. And the second thing which I wanted your views on, that's equally important, is how do you develop our energy sector within a country more? For instance, I am told that there is a lack of enough skilled personnel in the energy sector, and there is a need for addressing skill related issues. And though people are being incorporated and there is training they are looking at training at fairly large numbers, but I think we are still quite a distance away from having an efficient one. A point that Mr. Ahmed brought out, that we have a lot of refineries and things like that, and there is a greater interest in countries to use our skill levels here. But can we deliver on what is seen as the Indian promise?
Yeah. You see, first thing, Maruf, I think there's a huge change, for instance, when we look at energy security today. It's very different from what it used to be 5 years ago, 7 years ago, 8 years ago. Today, when we talk about energy security, ground realities are beginning to change. Now, on India's initiative, and together with France, we have set up now International Solar Alliance. And next month probably is going to be formally inaugurated when the French president is in Delhi. That's a major initiative in terms of energy diplomacy of India. A whole idea is basically to connect with more than 100 countries on the one hand, and at the same time with large developed economies on the other. Capital, expertise, technology, and at the same time using that in order to connect with fellow developing countries, especially countries in Latin America. And this is a huge, probably the most spectacular initiative taken by India in terms of energy security and energy diplomacy. Number two, when it comes to oil and gas also, the picture has begun to change. Earlier we actually used to go there. We had no alternative but to go there. Ask for an appointment, try to meet her. Things have changed. Now all we have to do is send a polite invitation and they turn up in Delhi. We saw that just 2 weeks ago when Saudi Aramco CEO, ExxonMobil and the BPs, and they were all here in Delhi at a very short notice. Now they are the one who come here, because let's not forget one thing. India is going to be the fastest growing market for oil and gas for next 40 years. And the growth in India today is about 6% at one time, and I think it will soon touch 11% in time to come. When you look at the overall growth of hydro, they will come here whether they like our face or not. So what has happened? The construct, contours, and color of energy diplomacy has gone through a complete change. It's a different thing altogether. Now with our economy, if we continue to grow at 8%, which we are likely to, then you will see our, for instance, position and our capability and capacity and everything will go through a rapid change. And energy diplomacy, if we deploy it well, I think there will be still a lot of work to do, but we don't need to worry. Second, and Rosneft recently invested $12 billion to acquire a refinery here. They have come here not because they like our face, they have come here because we provide them an opportunity. They were looking for, demand security, and we have provided that. In return, we've got a refinery and $10 billion, plus that kind of, now with the elephant coming in, other companies are also coming in terms of investing in India's oil and gas sector. Rapidly, secondly, quickly, that other point, very important point, with, energy sector growing fast, atomic, renewables, and hydrocarbons, include coal and all that, we had now shortage of people. We need to immediately set up at least 2 or 3 universities to train people. We also need to set up more training institute where we take people from whichever sector and then train them as soon as possible. My own assessment is, my own personal thing is, we will require 30,000 managers over coming few years for the energy sector, including renewables. So that kind of scope, that kind of potential, we need to, so huge opportunity. And if not the government, I think the private sector should take initiative, set up such universities. There are already 2 or 3, but we need more specific, and should also set up especially universities and centers specializing on renewables on the one hand, wind, gas and all that. But with India's economy moving more in the gas, in the direction of natural gas, I think this is going to open up a completely new world for our youngsters who are looking for careers in this sector, and at the same time redefine the way we look at hydrocarbon.
Very well brought out, sir. In fact, Mr. Ahmed, sir, I just want you to take forward some of the points that Mr. Taneja has made, and we are a bit short on time, but, do you see a role for greater competition amongst the companies that are already operating in the Indian market? Because the general complaint is there is a monopoly of a handful, IOCL, HPCL, BPCL, and some others, that there isn't enough competition, there isn't enough effort being made to expand the energy sector and give more business opportunities and create more opportunities for Indian corporates and Indian industry to enter into an area which Mr. Taneja has just articulated is a huge area of opportunity. And what are your final thoughts, sir?
Government of India is already looking at various ways in which we can revamp our industry, both the public sector and the private sector. They are looking at amalgamations of certain companies so that you could have a seamless connectivity in terms of exploration, development, and refining, marketing, etc. All of that is being looked at. So there is nothing that has been excluded or left out. Another area I would suggest is, as we look at the reform of the public sector, some far greater autonomies in terms of day-to-day functioning, in terms of major decision making, would have to be given to those chief executives and to the boards of these companies. And I think far greater freedom in terms of their travel, in terms of their engagements with foreign partners, etc., could also be looked at as a reform area. So I think that is already being looked at, and we are also looking at regulation in terms of far greater autonomies. We are looking at new regulations which would meet the needs of the government in terms of poverty alleviation, and at the same time would make our domestic scenarios much more robust.
Well, very important points, but so we are terribly short of time, and I can only conclude by saying that inasmuch as India's enormous dependence on import of energy-related resources for our economy to boom, there is also a flip side to it, and that is there are an enormous number of opportunities within the Indian sector for those who want to get involved and become part of the energy success story, which India is very keen to enact. Thank you very much, sir, for your wisdom, and we'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, goodbye.